Okay, we are live with Montgomery County Republican Club's Direct Line show for Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. We're joined by our host and co-host. Our host is Ryan Nidek, and Matthew Foldy. Our special guest is candidate for governor of the great state of Virginia, Kirk Cox. Welcome, everyone, and take it away, Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Dwight. As Dwight said, I'm Ryan. This is Matt Foldy, our YR president. We're honored to be here tonight with the next governor of Virginia, Kirk Cox, to ask him a few questions about his race and how we can get involved and help from our side of the Potomac River. Matt, do you want to take it away with our first question?
Sure. Well, I'll get us started off on a broad note. Speaker Cox, can you tell us how you got involved in politics from your previous role as a high school history and civics teacher? What made you sort of change career paths and jump into running for elected office yourself?
Well, Matt, I appreciate it very much being here today. Actually, it really wasn't much of a change of roles. It was perfect for me. I always wanted to be a teacher. So when I got out of college, I was a U.S. and Virginia government teacher, which was very, very natural, and was a basketball and baseball coach. And I loved, Virginia's history. We're the oldest legislative body in the New World in the House of Delegates. And I taught for about 5 years and said, you need a little bit more firsthand experience. I go, Matt, I'm just a little bit older than you. I sort of go back. I was the Reagan-Bush Volunteer of the Year in '84, so just slightly older. So in '85, I left teaching for a year and actually drove a guy running for governor, Wyatt Durrett. And I met President Reagan. I met Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush, Liddy Dole. It was fascinating for a young school teacher to get that firsthand experience. And I made $500 a month, big money. But the driver meets everybody, and we lost badly. And I got the bug. I said, this is a great experience. I'd like to run for the House of Delegates. And here's what was great is we're a citizen legislature. So we're in 60 days in the even year and 46 in the odd. I could do both. And so I could bring that experience to the classroom and then be part of that great experiment in representative democracy. So I ran and somehow won, had no idea what I was doing, knocked on about 8,000 doors, got bit by 2 dogs, had a lot of students help me. And it was a real grassroots campaign. So there were 36 Republicans when I got elected out of 100. So we were way in the minority. So we luckily got Governor Allen and, then Governor Gilmore eventually took the majority over. Make a long story short, worked my way up to committee chairman, then our majority leader leading our floor debate, and then speaker. So that was a real blessing. Probably one of the highlights was we just had the 400th anniversary in 2019 of that oldest legislative body in the New World. And I got to chair that commission. So that was an incredible joy in Jamestown. So that's sort of how I got involved.
We'll have plenty more to talk about education, but Ryan, over to you.
Yeah, for sure. So, after many decades serving honorably in the legislature, what made you decide to switch over and run for governor?
Yeah, because and I think this is a good thing. I'm a creature of the legislature. I, very much believe in the people's house, and that's the Virginia House of Delegates. And I love the whole concept. When we lost power back in 2019, I really, Ryan, thought about, I've had a great career. I've been doing this 32 years, got to be speaker. Is that it? And boy, I watched the Democrats over the last year and a half. I think I hate to exaggerate, but almost decimate Virginia, whether it be we had 4 major tax increases, we had a total shift in regulations and not believing in business really creating jobs. Then we went to the pandemic, and I think Governor Northam, frankly, has done a very, very poor job of leadership. We were back in April in the bottom 5 in testing. Our Virginia Employment Commission, which is key for people with unemployment, is the worst in the nation. And as a delegate, sometimes it takes us 3 months to get a phone call back. And that's key. I guess opening of schools really got to me as a teacher. In July, I was advocating for that, had a responsibility to do that. Governor had no leadership on that. And a lot of schools, frankly, didn't think the governor had their back, and very few opened around Labor Day. I had 2 proposals. Number one, an opening proposal, and the second one, something called the Read Fund. Because if we were going to go virtual, the Read Fund would have provided, whether it be tutoring, teaching pods, hardware, software, Chromebooks for parents to help get them through it. I couldn't get the Democrats even to talk about that. We had a special session back in August. It was all about anti-law enforcement. We had bills in to change from a felony to a misdemeanor assaulting a police officer, getting rid of school resource officers. And then finally, when the vaccine finally came out, 3 weeks in, we were last again. So all of that combined, that mindset, almost not that commonality anymore of those great virtues that the Bill of Rights, et cetera, they just seem to have a different mindset. So I said, hey, you need to step up yourself. You can complain, you can rail about the Democrats, you've got the experience, you've done this, you've worked with a lot of governors. So I decided to run myself. So that's sort of what spurred me on. And, having been speaker and traveled the state a lot and haven't raised a lot of money, I think I have the background that you need. I'll say one other thing. I come from the bluest Republican district in the state. It's 46% Republican, 30% minority, and we won it by 4 points with Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg and Planned Parenthood putting $1.5 billion against us. So I think that's a nice record to run on.
Yeah, we'll definitely want to talk about winning in November as well. But I do want to drill down a bit more on education itself and talk about how you, as a former history and civics guy yourself, see what's going on in classrooms around the country and obviously in Virginia in particular, in K through 12 schools and public schools and private schools. You're seeing sort of an outgrowth of what the craziness that you're learning in college. We're learning that now in K through 12 schools, and it's not history, but it's being taught as history. But you can look at the 1619 project being presented as fact, and now sort of more recently critical race theory, where basically everything about America is evil. What as governor do you view your role as being to sort of counter the ahistorical history curricula that is starting to seep into classrooms across the country?
I think a governor has a very big role. Let me say, first of all, in Virginia, a governor has a tremendous amount of appointment power. So probably over 300 boards and commissions. And one of those is the Board of Education, which is, of course, very key for K-12. You also pick the state superintendent and the Secretary of Education. So you really, to some degree, Matt, you set the tone for, as you talk about sort of that curriculum set, what you're going to teach and how you're going to teach it. As a government teacher, I was exactly the opposite. I taught the founding documents, of course, the Declaration and the Constitution, but the Federalist Papers, were a great, between the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists were your key debates on almost every key aspect of a republic. And, it's really interesting. I love to point out to people like Frederick Douglass, who say, just live up to your documents. They're great concepts and great principles. So jettisoning those principles is certainly not the way to go, to your point. And so I would be someone that would be very, very, very strong on that, whether it be on the K-12 level or on the higher ed level. Boy, we're seeing that, unfortunately, in Virginia, that I can't tell you, my students will come back to me, and this disturbed me more than anything, and said, we had a topic list, and there were 2 or 3 conservative topics I really wanted to write on. I didn't think about it because I knew if I just picked them, let's forget about how I wrote about them. If I pick them, my grade probably goes down. And then if I write a certain viewpoint, then my grade certainly is lower. And I'm going to myself, that's unconscionable as a teacher, as an educator, as someone in higher ed. And so to your point on both the K-12 and the higher ed level, let me also remind you that every board of visitors in Virginia is picked by the governor. And they cannot be picked just because they supported you and gave you a lot of money during the campaign. Those are 2 important positions. And frankly, what's happened in a lot of our universities is, our college presidents smartly sort of wine and dine those board of visitors, and they haven't played a very active oversight role, haven't questioned a lot of those type of policies, professors hiring professors, progressives hiring progressives. So I could go on forever. There's so much to do in that space. And I've never said, you want a real balance in challenging thinking, but to your point, whether it be critical race theory or the 1619 project, the way we're going is just detrimental to everything we fought for years. So that is something I would be very, very strong on. Can I also say, I think the key, having been around a long time, I know exactly how to address those quickly. You don't want to be figuring out a year in, this is what I can do to turn that around.
Yep, definitely. And I'll also throw out there, Frederick Douglass is a great, storied Marylander. So you mentioned the Board of Visitors.
On message, Ryan, on message.
On message, I know we're a Maryland show, but you mentioned the Board of Visitors and the governor's role in appointing them and overseeing the university level of education here in Virginia. One area where the Board of Visitors has really maybe come into more public light at our universities over the past year is their influence on setting the high-level directives for university reopening policies, right? Are we going to bring students back to the classroom, or are they going to do school online? We're seeing much of a similar debate happening in our local school districts over whether or not to bring back K-12 students, and there are, tons of frustrated parents of students all the way from as young as kindergarten all the way up to the college level that their children are still not going to class in person. After a year of this pandemic. What would your response to that be as governor? And what is your plan? I know you touched on it a little bit, but maybe to drill down on getting our schools reopened.
I was very specific back in July. The American Academy of Pediatrics was saying back then how devastating it was going to be if you did not open. And so I just didn't say open. I really tried to have a very comprehensive plan. So, for example, going back to July, liability coverage for a lot of localities. I mean, the state could have done that. Number two, we had, as you know, probably over $1 billion in federal funds come down that we had access to. We could have used a lot of that for school opening. We have a basic aid piece in Virginia's budget, and it has things like textbooks in it. And obviously you weren't going to be spending a lot of thing on textbooks. So I talked about school nurses, contact tracing, all those things back in July that should have been put in place. And we had a special session, please remember, in Virginia in August. So we could have basically put all those mechanisms in place for a post-Labor Day opening. And the Democrats just weren't interested at all. And so I did that. Now, fast forward to January, I was one of the first people to call for getting teachers vaccinated a good month before the governor did, which I thought was very, very important. And the other thing I think you really have to look at is, and you see this, even with hybrids. Give you an example. The problem with hybrids, even in elementary school, is, so you have a student that goes, he's second grade, or he goes for 2 days. Where does he go the other 2 days? Probably daycare. So he goes to a different cohort of kids. And then he comes back to the public school. And that kind of thing just makes no sense, even as far as exposure goes. And I think we all know now that, and of course, the Democrats always say follow the science. I think we know exactly what kind of effect or almost no effect it has as far as students go. And you've had some schools, especially private schools, have been very successful in opening. But I'll say this, right? I think not only do we need to open, and this is interesting, we had a bill this year. The start on the Senate side that came over was very simple. It said schools shall have an in-class 5-day option and a virtual option. And the Democrats started to get a lot of pressure around January and February, and they finally passed a remnant of that bill in the House. But here's the difference. Our bill's going to affect July 1st. We tried to put an emergency clause on it to make it go into effect immediately upon the governor signing, and they wouldn't go along with that. So they felt enough pressure to do something, not to do much. And if I could, here's the next thing we got to deal with is learning loss. And that's really key. You're going to have kids right now coming back. McKinsey study says probably at least 3 months behind in math and science. You've got all the psychological effects, et cetera. I have advocated a 10-point plan very quickly that our Department of Education quickly needs to figure out where kids are. Where are they in math? Where they're in science? Are they 3, 6, 9 months behind? And we need to have intense tutoring. If a kid's 6 months behind, it's going to be one-on-one. I've advocated for substitute teachers. Student teachers should get college credit for that. We need a lot of very smart things of that nature. The Read Fund, which I've talked about previously, still should be helping parents with that. So there's a lot we can be doing. Opt-in summer school, allowing people to opt in, and once again, giving sort of enhanced stipends for teachers to teach summer school this year. So there's a lot that can be done that has to be done. And let me end with this. I had 4 boys. And I think you guys can relate to this. Hadn't been that long ago. So think about when you're in high school. Your senior year is everything. I mean, you have memories, whether they be you're in DECA or sports or the band or whatever you do, your social stuff, your academic stuff. You miss your whole senior year. You cannot get that back. You're a 3rd grade kid, okay, in inner city where reading is essential, and you're 6 months behind, you're not getting that back. And if we don't have some urgency and frankly, we should be a bit panicked about what's going on and take that attitude because it's just a very bad situation.
I'm glad you brought that up because we had Governor Ehrlich of Maryland and Governor Allen of Virginia on last week, and they talked a lot about that. It's just, it's not just school, right? For a lot of kids, especially, you get into high school and you talked about senior year, sports are where they learn a lot of life lessons. They grow up. Some kids are relying on sports to try to get a college scholarship, and you're really, you're denying them that opportunity.
If I could give you a little bit different perspective, it was interesting as a basketball and baseball coach. Mm-hmm. My students' grades always went up during season. Mm-hmm. And I was a basketball coach. And look, I coached some kids that, hey, academics weren't their thing. But they love basketball. And I had a great relationship with them. They came to my class every day before basketball practice after school. And I tutored them, and they were engaged. And they wouldn't even work in the off season. Think about them now. They've got no incentive whatsoever because that's sort of what drove them. And that's a small story, but that's multiplied over so many other different types of things. And the psychological effects we're also going to see for years.
To keep with the education thing, for my last education question is going to start to shift us more to your points on cancel culture. But, I saw from across the river that, like in California, some public schools in Northern Virginia named after, very normal and regular figures in American history, Thomas Jefferson and George Mason, are in the process of relinquishing those names. I don't even know to what. I think like Kamala Harris High School was one of the locally generated names to replace them. What is going on in Virginia? Because cancel culture is something that you've been talking about on the campaign trail. And obviously you're talking about it because it's happening in Virginia. So what is going on with the desire to rename things after founding fathers in Virginia? I mean, the irony there, of course, is inescapable.
Boy, it is such a key point, and it is the Thomas Jeffersons and the George Washingtons. Martha Washington was a subject of debate as far as a women's monument down here. And boy, it's once you start trying to rewrite history like that, there's just no stopping that. Where does that end? And we've seen that over and over and over and again. Monument Avenue obviously would be another a big one. And it's really interesting. I was listening to Governor Wilder on a WRVA Richmond show, one of the first African-American governor. He was even talking about all the money that's been spent, and it could be spent much more effectively in K-12, et cetera. So we're seeing cancel culture all over the place. You see it on college campuses, you see K-12, you see it with that renaming. I had this is interesting, a local gun store, Dances, called Dances in Colonial Heights, Virginia. And they're great folks. I mean, everyone knows them. They do a lot in the community. And so here's what they did. I found this astounding. Ammunition is very hard to get. Anyone that loves to shoot, et cetera. There's shortages everywhere. So if you got any gun show store, you hardly can find it. So they simply had this post that said, got ammo. I mean, it's just a little sales post. And basically they got censored for that post. And what was interesting, when you look at Facebook's own standards, they say that gun stores, et cetera, can advertise sales of ammunition, et cetera. So now it's going so far is you're getting censored for stuff that they even say is within their community standards. And so that's a really, really big deal. I think I read recently that 75% of the people think that big tech deliberately single out people they don't agree with to censure. And when you get to 75%, that's not good. And even a decent percentage of Democrats in that poll felt that way. So I think it can be extremely, for the First, Second Amendment in particular, it can be very, very, very devastating. And it's a tough issue. I'll tell you what's a tough issue. I think y'all know this. I mean, that's the new town square. Once again, I remember teaching the newspaper. Remember that obsolete thing? And I would go, Section 1, go to the back. You'll read the editorial page. And Section 2 is local news. And no one gets their news from that anymore. And so the reason why today those social media platforms are so important is that's where everyone gets their news. That's where they get so many other things. That's your public forum. And, obviously there's some private companies and some things that come into play there, but we're going to have to take some pretty big steps, because I do think both in our political world, our education world, and our news world, it's having devastating consequences.
One quick follow-up on the TJ and George Mason, and all of these just sort of pushes to change very, fundamental to American history folks. Do you have a sense of where that push is coming from? Who sees these things and says, you know what we got to do while public schools are closed, we have to rename them? Where is this coming from? Because in California, it makes sense. It's California, but that's why it was very shocking to me. In Virginia, we're seeing this happen. This is the state of all these guys. They're all from here, So why is it happening there?
Well, Virginia's had a fundamental shift. It almost make your head spin the last 4 years in the Democratic Party. I mean, if you look, their progressive wing has just come to dominate, and it's just been a whirlwind. So a lot of that does come from that wing of their party. I mean, here's a good example. There have been 7 very progressive Democrats who are now being primaried by 7 Democrats who are further to the left. So if you're not seeing things like that, whether it be council culture or the greenest of the Green New Deals or the most harshest anti-law enforcement stuff, you're questioned. And so a lot of it is that you've probably got 10 Democrats running for lieutenant governor, 6 or 7 are in the legislature. So how do you make noise, and how do you make a point with progressives? You take issues like that, to your point, really for them are very, very big issues. And I think the other thing is just not understanding that wonderful history and commonality that we all have to have. I mean, a Democratic Republic does not work. To me, if everyone doesn't have that sense of those values we can all agree on, we can really debate within those values. And boy, for the first time, that worldview is different. And that is a disturbing thing when you don't even have the same worldview. And that's been a pretty recent phenomenon that we have seen. And boy, we see it in every aspect of legislation, of speeches from the Democrats, et cetera. So I would say it's their very progressive wing. They've probably had 20 new delegates to 25 new delegates in the last 4 years, and they're really pushing on that.
Yeah, and I think this creates a real opportunity, for you running for governor, as people in the middle that don't fall into that, far left progressive group will see some of this stuff and say, why are we renaming, Thomas Jefferson High School or places named after George Washington or George Mason? But to kind of shift back to the big tech censorship, I know, that's a very complicated issue. And I think all of the viewers of this show, at least, will be in agreement that something has to be done about it. As governor, what would you do, if anything, to really push back against that?
Yeah, I've talked about various things, and you're right, Ryan. I mean, you need to be reasonable, because you do have some tough philosophical issues with that. But it has gotten to the point it has gone so far that you're going so far beyond what sort of the original intent was, as far as sexually explicit material and, and more violent material, where now you're just, no one knows why they're being deplatformed. I mean, I've had so many groups down my way who've really tried to be careful, who suddenly find themselves no warning, and suddenly, that happens. So, I had several proposals. I'll just give you 2 or 3 quick ones. Require big tech to publish standards used to censor posts and deplatform or shadow ban users clearly and separately from the terms of use. Allow users to opt out of algorithms used to determine which content users see. Sort of a 3-strike concept of warnings prior to adopting permanent bans and suspensions, making available remedial steps that can be taken to restore accounts, and particularly looking at deplatforming qualified candidates for elected office, which I think is a real problem. And, so those are some of the things. Florida, and our Governor DeSantis has done a lot of that, has looked at that issue, especially looking at, daily fines of egregious violations of law and their own standards to sort of get big tech's attention. And I had that as part of my platform too.
Yep, definitely. And I'll pass it over to Matthew, but I just want to add in that this is an area where, just due to the interstate nature of it, some states really, cracking down have a great benefit for people concerned about this issue all across the country in terms of changing the policies of these companies. Matt?
To go To go to Governor Northam for a bit, before he received the nationwide notoriety for his med school yearbook, I think most conservatives knew about him for his abortion comments about keeping it safe while the mother can make a decision for post-birth abortion, which I assume was a state delegate, but maybe State Senator Kathy Tran was advocating for. Can you tell us about pro-life issues in the legislature on the campaign trail, and you said Planned Parenthood spent heavily against you. What do you want to do as governor on issues of life?
Yeah, there are several things. I mean, that has been a fundamental issue for me since I was elected. And my faith informs that. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Psalm 139. And it's King David, who wrote a lot of the Psalms, and always a man after God's own heart. And boy, King David was an interesting character because, he lived a life that had ups and downs, but, he loved the Lord. And I always loved what he said. He said, you created my innermost being. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. You knit me together in my mother's womb. And that to me is, we are the wonderful creation of the Creator. And that informs that. If you think back, I did something really unusual when the Kathy Tran bill came up. The New York Senate sort of flipped to Republican and Democrat, and they passed sort of a similar third trimester abortion bill. And we really feared in Virginia, that was the direction Virginia was going in. So when you're a speaker, you're up on this big platform, and you're sort of the presiding officer, and you're speaking for the entire House, and really you're head of your party. And we actually have a seat on the floor. So if you look at the Virginia House of Delegates, it's sort of a big oval, and so they actually give you a seat. No one ever uses it. It's called the worst seat in the House. It's way down the well. And I had the Majority Leader, Todd Gilbert, come up and preside, and I gave a speech on the Kathy Tran bill because I felt so strongly about it. And I said this, I said, as long as I have a microphone, I will speak up for life. And I always remember this number. I said this, 61,012,977. I said it like 4 times. So what do you think that number is? I go, that's the number of abortions we have had since Roe versus Wade. And you always talk about being on the wrong side of history. And we've talked about the Thomas Jefferson, George Washington thing, which they will say. And I go, you talking about being on the wrong side of history on an issue that I think we will regret more than any other issue. And we were able to defeat that bill. And it's interesting, even when they took over, that bill they didn't put back in. Now, they did put in taxpayer-funded abortion for Medicaid, et cetera, this year. So that'd be the first thing I roll back. We had a very good informed consent bill that they, of course, have repealed. And of course, I would roll that back. So I would say they've had several key bills we worked in for years that Governor McDonald had that we would try to put immediately back in.
Yep. So to kind of shift gears a little bit, kind of the primary process in Virginia. If any of our viewers aren't aware, Virginia is a unique state in that they have the option, the parties can either select their nominee by convention or by a primary. And this time around, it seems that they're selecting a convention. Can you kind of describe what the process is going to be like this cycle?
Well, that's the toughest question you've asked me so far, Ryan, because I'm still laughing and trying to figure out a little bit myself. I'll say you're exactly right. I'll say Central Committee, which is about 80 some members made up of your congressional district chairman, various other people, have been fighting over a primary convention for months, back since December. So here's where we're at right now. It looks like we're going to have a May 8th convention at Liberty University, but not right on the campus, probably at a satellite parking facility, more of a drive-through type of convention. You will have to be elected as a delegate through your local unit committee, and then you come to the convention. It looks like it'll be ranked choice voting, where you will pick your first, second, or third. Could be more than that. It could be first, second, third, fourth, fifth. They haven't decided all the rules. And so what that would allow probably is you could vote once and then leave. So that's where it's at now. I don't want to get into too much detail about this. There are some negotiations I hear, which is good, of allowing some satellite voting. What that would mean is maybe in each congressional district, like up in Northern Virginia, there'd be a Loudoun or Prince William, a Fairfax place you could vote, so you wouldn't have to drive to Liberty. There's thoughts to really loosen up the party process where there'd be enough delegate allegation whereby anyone that signs up can actually go. So we'll know all those details, hopefully, in about, I think not this Saturday, but next Saturday. So it looks like some kind of assembled convention in Lynchburg with the possibility of satellite voting and the possibility of some widening of allowing or latitude letting delegates come.
Yeah, I'll say, we Maryland Republicans have always wondered what goes on with your primaries down there. But to that end, how would you say campaigning has changed, not only from going from the state legislative level to the gubernatorial level, but from when you first started to now you're campaigning in the time of coronavirus? How has the world of political campaigns evolved or not evolved in your estimation?
Woo, yeah, it's changed dramatically. I mean, the money is unbelievable. I mean, when I first ran my first race, which was a very competitive race, I think I raised $50,000. I raised $2 million. And then that's unusual because I was speaker and they were after me. But I had to raise $2 million to win a House district with 85,000 people that pays, which is good. And this part's good, pays $17,640. So the money is unbelievable. The Democrats, frankly, especially the last few years, have really accessed national money. My opponent raised almost no money in the district. So that's the other thing that Democrats have done, either through act below small dollar contributions or large dollar contributions. So that's a sea change. Probably the difference in governor's a lot different. I mean, it's as you know, you got to raise a lot of money in the nomination phase. Governor's races are probably $25 million races, so they're very, very expensive. Sort of the good news is that New Jersey and Virginia are the only two really states in play. As you know, there are no congressional or national elections, and so I really do think America's attention will be on Virginia. I mean, it's the most likely state to be able to flip to a Republican. You know how this works. I mean, the year after a presidential race and a congressional race, what's the bellwether race? It's probably Virginia. A lot of people will say that will set the trend. So good news for us. A lot of attention on Virginia, winning back Virginia. So I think that will be good. It'll be easier to raise some national money. Not easy, but easier. And so the Democrats have really done well on the money piece. And so we're going to have to compete there. I think I can do that, but it's a lot of work. And you spend a lot of your time raising money. So that's just part of the game. What I do like about it is, boy, you get to do a lot of fun travel and just meet a lot of incredible people. I did a little bit of that as speaker because I helped out on a lot of campaigns. But it's interesting. I mean, I'm doing something. You got to have some fun. This can't all be just, frowns and looking, very tense. So I'm doing hot dog reviews. So, and I had a really interesting young man today. I was on an earlier Zoom meeting. He said, man, all my friends think that's the coolest thing in the world. So I wear my little softball jacket. I was a 1985 softball state champion. I have a patch. And I wear that. It barely fits. It's silver. It's really it looks like a bowling jacket. But I wear that. Then I go to these places people suggest, and I get a hot dog with mustard, onions, and chili. And I get a specialty dog. I take one bite and I rate it. And usually I have some other people help me, and that's been fun. And we've just gotten a lot of fun press on that. So we're trying to do some fun, different things too. Maybe not to be quite so boring. But it's challenging, but it's fun.
What was the best one you've had so far?
The best one I had so far was one that was deep fried, and it had deep fried macaroni and cheese on it. A little bit of barbecue, coleslaw, and chili. The second best one was Smithfield, Virginia is known for it's obviously it's ham and it's bacon. So I had this incredible bacon wrapped Smithfield dog with all kinds of other crazy stuff on it. So pretty good. Then I went to a place that I didn't understand, a tree growing through the roof, which I thought was pretty cool. So the hot dog was good too, but the tree growing through the roof was pretty unique.
Yeah,
you guys got to come over the border and find me a hot dog place in Northern Virginia. And so Ryan, you can find me one around Tech, but
I'm
Matt,
a
you gotta find me
vegetarian.
one. You
I
gotta
don't know if
find
you
me
want
one, and yeah, we can do it together. You can rate it with me.
I'm a
Yeah.
vegetarian, so I don't know if you want my hot dog recommendations.
We'll get Matt a tofu hot dog. to
Yeah,
go with
exactly.
it.
I
Well,
don't
that's
know.
right, Matt. Matt, we can switch. You can pick the what we're eating, and yeah, you gotta be flexible. I mean, I've done donuts. I did donuts down. I forgot. I feel terrible, Ryan. This is
Carol Lee
awful.
Donuts, right?
Yeah, that's it. Thanks. What's
Right,
wrong
that's
with
right
me?
down the street from me. You were.
I just did it. What a terrible memory. Nick took me there, and I rated donuts. So Matt, I do donuts. I can do anything.
You know, I have to admit, I did my research before the show, and I saw you were at Carol Lee Donuts, and you said it's not quite a hot dog, but it'll have to do. And I was a little bit confused, but now it all makes sense.
Now you get it. Yeah,
Now
thanks.
I get it. Yeah. So we talked, earlier about Virginia being a bellwether race for the country. What should people, not only across the country, but in Maryland, really be paying attention to as we, as the race develops?
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot to pay attention to, because I really do think, and I mean this, Virginia, if you watch Virginia trends the last 4 years, and you've highlighted a lot of them, whether it be some of the curriculums we've seen, the mindset, the worldview, et cetera, I do think we can stop that. And Virginia probably is the state everyone's seeing. Can Republicans really stop that? Can they win a state that has been trending the wrong way? That as recently as 4 years ago, think about this, had 67 seats in the House of Delegates. My message would be, we better stop it this year. The Democrats own everything. It's one-party Democrat control, state and national. So people have seen the effects of that. So we have the best, to me, messaging that we've had since Bob and Don won 2009. We have some great issues to run on. You've talked about them, school opening, some of the higher ed issues, et cetera. But if we don't win, if I can say, that's not a good bellwether. That is, probably solidifies Virginia as, I'm not sure very doable in the coming years. And I hate to say that. So.
Yeah, well, we certainly understand that, being in Maryland, and we have a very important governor's race coming up in 2022, where it'll really define whether we're able to have staying power here as a party. I guess, Matt, if you have one last question, then we can move into final thoughts.
My last question was going to be more of a final thought, so let me ask it, and then we'd love to hear your sort of closing thoughts for today on the gov race and on food. But my final question, and you can use this to transition right into your final thoughts tonight, is as you said, we don't exactly know how the primary will happen in just a couple of months, which is a problem for another day. But what is your message to Virginia Republican primary voters of why they should put you as number one in the ranked choice voting? And then zooming ahead to November, what's your message to Democrats and independents who obviously, we need to vote Republican to win statewide? What are your messages? Maybe
Sure, I'll do the first one. So why should Republicans pick Kirk Cox in a convention? I think I'm by far the most electable. I've proven it in a very tough district. I've done a lot of campaign over the years in Northern Virginia. I do think, hopefully, I'm a very genuine person. I'll tell you exactly what I think. I do think people are looking for that. They just want you to be yourself. I think the record is important, and a whole host of issues we've talked about tonight. I've not only gotten things passed. I love the Teddy Roosevelt quote, "The man in the arena," which I know you're familiar with, and sort of the man that's been bloodied and fought the battles. And I think you need someone like that. You need someone the very first day knows how to take these policies and actually implement them, that will appoint people that can get those things done, unlike Governor Northam, who has so many political appointments, and we've seen what's happened, et cetera. So that's very, very important. You need someone with great energy, passion, has a little bit of fun, that will campaign all across the state. So I think record-wise, demeanor-wise, Republicans should pick me. So why should you pick me in the general election? I think on a lot of the kitchen table issues that affect everyone. I don't care whether you're a swing voter, et cetera. School opening is one of those. You're probably familiar with TJ, the governor's school up in Northern Virginia. And, the Democrats control almost every school board up there. But now we just see even schools like that go from being merit-based and admission-based to sort of open enrollment. We're seeing issues like that I think a lot of swing voters, whether you're Asian American, Latino, whatever you're going, that my child's worked a long time to get in that school. And I think they're looking at some of those policies going, that's not where I'm at. I'm not at a Green New Deal that's going to cost me $800 a year, or California emission standards, or some of the other things I think have gone way too far. In your generation particularly, what I admire about you more than when I came out of school is you're very entrepreneurial. I mean, you're very, whether it be a startup or a little bit daring. I mean, you're not going to necessarily work for the same place for 30 years. Well, look at Virginia's regulations now. The barriers to entry, the barriers to a startup for a millennial. The Democrats are all for that. I mean, they're all for regulations that are stifling. Creativity in higher ed. You know, I was the one to put the bill in for the Online Virginia Network, which is a consortium of Old Dominion, George Mason, James Madison, and community colleges to come up with one platform that's cheaper of key majors. And so a bit of innovation. I've done a lot in the technology space up in Northern Virginia. So I do think I've had some broad-based key issues that affect everybody. And broadband would be a huge one for rural and Southwest Virginia. So all those are very, very important. And I do feel like that I've run a lot of campaigns and hopefully have the personality to translate into a Republican people can really vote for.
Yep. Well, I just wanted to, thank you for coming on to our show on behalf of, all the Republicans here in Montgomery County. For anyone looking to get involved in the campaign, they can go to kirkcox.com. That's your website. It also looks like they can text Kirk to 22999. Get information on the campaign. And, tomorrow I'll have to go get some Carol Lee donuts and tell them that Kirk Cox sent me.
Well, thank you, Ryan. If I could too, because we mentioned that also anyone that would like to donate to the campaign, you already say kirkcox.com, but it's just kirkcox.com/donate. So we certainly could use that help. But I'm going to take you up on the Carol Lee thing, and Matt and I are going to find something that we can eat that's mutual and have some fun.
There we go.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. And we look forward to following along with the race as it develops in the weeks and months to come, as well as seeing it through in November.
A lot of fun. Thank y'all. A lot of great questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a lot of great answers.